Are gonna Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Cando Links to Learning. We're honored, excited that you have joined us this afternoon. We are going to hear from the team from Indigena Capital. We have three team members, speakers who are going to tell us all about what this business is all about. So we're looking forward to today's webinar. So thank you for joining us. And for those who are watching on the replay, thank you for joining us. We're honored you're here. We first and foremost always need to give thanks to Creator. You know, as that sun rises in the east, it's a gift of another day, an opportunity, you know, to walk that good path, walk our purpose, opportunity to honor ourselves, our spirit, the land, those around us, and an opportunity to grow and learn. And that's what these webinars are all about. Some good knowledge, good information that's being passed on. So welcome to Cando's Links to Learning. There will be an opportunity for any questions, comments, any discussion that can happen after. If you have any questions along the way, feel free to use that chat box. I will absolutely make note of it. For those who don't know me, my name's Michelle Tanse, Michelle Nevadomi Mitzi Gasan, Edmonton, and Misquachie, Waskayagan, Treaty 6. So I just introduced myself. I'm Nehi Awesquayo. I'm a Cree woman, and I live here in Edmonton and Misquachie, Waskayagan. So I always take a moment to acknowledge where you are, acknowledge the land in which you walk and live and breathe and play on, acknowledge the story of the original peoples. This week is a unique week. We have on September 30th, the first ever National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. So it's an opportunity, you know, to acknowledge the history of, you know, residential school survivors and the legacy and that story. So really, really important week for us. So let's get on. I feel like we have lots to cover this afternoon, especially listening to, we got John, Justice, Justin, and Susan joining us from Indigena Capital. So they will provide an introduction to their sector and discuss how for over 35 years they have partnered directly with Indigenous nations across North America to deploy equity capital into nations projects to unlock these opportunities. So they will walk through their partnership model, provide a case study, and interact with participants through a question and answer session. So to me, that sounds like get prepared to be engaged and lend your voice and thoughts to today's topic. So our first, I'm going to introduce John first, and he is the CEO of Indigena Platform. He has spent over 35 years, wow, developing projects and providing financial solutions exclusively in partnership with First Nations, Inuit and Métis in Canada and tribal nations in the United States. So his vision and determination to assist Indigenous nations in using their rights and resources to create economies capable of sustaining their socio-economic needs which has led to the creation of hundreds of millions of dollars of new long-term commercial revenue for nations. So these assets have provided above sector returns for investors while at the same time creating material wealth for the nations. Now, John has a very, very, very long bio because he's been so involved, so engaged. I believe you can read it on our Cando website if you want to read a little bit more, because I feel like you're here to hear the speakers and not me, but I feel like this final tidbit is really important, and I'll introduce the other two. Prior to his work with nations, he attended Angelo State University after serving in the US military as a military intelligence analyst. Wow. Next we have Suzanne Hammer, who is the Vice President for Client Relations. She has worked exclusively with Indigenous nations for almost 20 years. She works closely with Indigenous nations chiefs and councils, communities, and their representatives, and has successfully helped organize and guide nations through designation and referendum votes. So Ms. Hammer has a thorough understanding and appreciation for the many challenges and complexities of endeavoring to create economically sustainable development with a federal regulatory framework. She started working with tribal nations in 1995 as a finance director. She went on to work with a growth fund as one of the 5 founding employees. In 2005, became the director of tribal housing. So she also has a plethora of experience underneath her belt. And finally, Justin is with us. And he has spent his 15-year career finding innovative ways to build organizations, coalitions, and partnerships between diverse stakeholders in the public and private sectors. He excels at finding ways to bridge the gap between parties using mutually beneficial and collaborative solutions. He holds a BA in political science and history with honors from Carleton University. All right, so welcome you 3, John, Susan, and Justin. We welcome you. We're so honored you're taking time to share about this important work that you're doing. So I'm passing the virtual mic to you.
Great. Michelle, on behalf of Indigena Capital, thank you for having us today, and appreciate Cando having us on board, and we're more than happy to introduce ourselves to this program. As you've already met Justin and Susan, I'll just jump right in so that we can use our time efficiently. Before I get started, I hope everybody has been well and their families are well, considering the environment we're all operating in. And certainly to Kamloops, we keep them close in our prayers, as they're one of our business partners in BC on a few particular ventures there. It's always good to know the history of, if you will, the founder of any given company, and as that founder, I'll provide you just a little bit of backdrop. I tried to tell people, because we have an office in Calgary, that I was from Southern Alberta, but after they listened to my accent, they realized it's a little further south. So home for me was Texas. And as most of us leave university here, at the time that I went into university, that in Texas, you're going to go into the resource sector, into the ag sector, or the finance sector. And so I kind of combined finance and oil and gas resources when I left university. And that quickly led me into an introduction. I became a CFO probably way before I should have been a chief financial officer at 26 or 27. We took on a new project in southwestern Colorado. And normally any new project would go to the chief operating officers and group, but they handed it to me because it had some tax attributes, and my background as CFO was a strong taxation understanding. And so once they handed that project to me, I went to introduce myself to a landowner, and lo and behold, it was a Indian tribe, as we referred to them in the States. And I had no understanding whatsoever of any indigenous communities across the U.S. Just on that front, there's approximately 574 tribal nations in the U.S., federally recognized tribal nations, and they would control about 55 million acres in land resources. And so I'll use the term reservation and reserves interchangeably, and I'm sure that most of your guests will follow that nomenclature, as that's how they refer to their reserves here in the U.S. as reservations. As I went to introduce myself to the tribe back in the mid 80s to late 80s, they were quite surprised, because at that time, similar to Canada, where you have Indigenous services, they had the Bureau of Indian Affairs. In the 80s, the Bureau of Indian Affairs had complete dominance over all, if you will, resource transactions for the tribe. In fact, they approved all those transactions versus the tribe themselves. And as someone who didn't understand this process, it made no sense to me, because I was, well, wait a minute, I'm meeting with the owner. Surely the owner has to provide approval for this process. But that meeting was very fortuitous for me, because it set me on a path that by working closely with that nation, I learned so much about, if you will, the indigenous space at that time. For someone who had no background understanding, I was in my late 20s. And at the same time, I had a lot of intellectual curiosity. And the intellectual curiosity that I had is I couldn't understand. You would know that the U.S. reservations are much larger in size as compared to Canadian reserves. And as I met with the tribe, I couldn't understand the impoverishment, because quite simply, they had almost 400,000 acres. They had almost every resource type. They had tremendous surface resources and a great human resource. And it was that intellectual curiosity that really drove me to, after I developed a resource project on their land with another company, to really start working closely with the nation. And that's led to what Indigena is today. And I'll provide a little of that brief background. So this nation, like a lot of indigenous nations, was suffering impoverishment at almost every level, from whether it be a housing need, a healthcare need, any commercial revenues, education, you name it. And again, I couldn't understand when they controlled so much. 35 years later, I can tell you, similar to the Indian Act in Canada, we have the Code of Federal Regulations in the US. And while that code might have been somewhat appropriate in the late 1800s, early 1900s, it actually acts as a barrier to entry for nations to free themselves economically, because it doesn't allow the engagement between investors directly with the nation to develop their own rights. Both the Indian Act and the Code of Federal Regulations was really designed that nations would remain passive and they would lease their lands and rights to others for development and receive the passive royalties and rents. So that's where our journey began. And that quickly, after I sold out the project that we developed after a few years, because the relationship I'd established with the Southern Ute Indian tribe of southwestern Colorado, they asked me if that I would go work for them. And quite honestly, I was honored, but I didn't necessarily want to work for anybody, but I did agree that I would serve as their financial advisor or investment banker, might be a better way to describe it. And my responsibilities were managing their fiscal state, their financial state, as well as driving economic development, taking them from a passive management model into an active, where they focused on the downstream commercial opportunities associated with their land. Well, I'll give you the short story. 10 years later, we had built their wealth to about $1 billion in liquidity, and had put in place a model. We had also been able to accomplish achieving a AAA credit rating by S&P, Moody's. And in fact, the Southern Utes were only the 13th sovereign as a nation, as compared to Japan, Canada at the time, to ever receive a AAA rating at that time. And that was because of their great successes that they achieved. I would tell you that we get a lot of credit for our work. I would tell you, though, the most important ingredient to success with nations is leadership and a willingness to change. The second most is, like all things, the experts that you engage to help you achieve your goal. In this case, I'll tell a quick story. I had an elder come to me, and in their language, they called me Panakadewitch, which was money man, and say, Mr. Jurrius, all things aren't about money. And I said, I asked her what would be the most important thing to her. And she said, well, of course, the education of our children, providing homes to our people, healthcare, our culture, our language, and right down the list. And quickly, as she finished, I said, you're exactly right. I agree. But those are priorities. And how do you provide those priorities? And she laughed and said, Panak, meaning money. She said, to provide those priorities. And so it became obvious through my interactions with that nation that the number one hurdle that nations needed to overcome, they needed access to capital. And so my first, if you will, 17 years, I acted as an investment banker. I started with Southern Ute, and then there's 3 Ute clans, and so I partnered with those different nations. Then after that period of time, I really wanted to become more of a capital provider versus just an investment banker. So I went to work for a large capital fund. However, my job there was to source capital specifically into tribal nation opportunities. And so this started all in the late 80s, early 90s. And I think it was in 2008 that we actually became a capital provider. However, if you looked at our background, you would say that most of our background was focused on just providing to nations that had resource opportunities. And so, but I would tell you, it wasn't because we had a preference to resource development. That was the only capital that would go into an unknown jurisdiction. So at that time, through the 80s and 90s, and I would tell you in some regards, even today, the indigenous space is what we refer to as sui generis. It's unknown. So financial institutions would ask, how do we perfect a lien on reserve or on reservation? How do we structure transactions to deal with political cycle and changes and things of that nature? And so it was with that acknowledgement on our part that we decided that ultimately we should just build our own fund. So I think we have a presentation that we're going to put up that'll make this a little bit easier. But I wanted to provide some background and basically tell you that, as this first slide will show you, is that started as a partner of the nation developing on their land, then rolled into an investment advisor, then became an allocator of capital from 28 to 2015. Then around 2015, the UN came to us, and James Anaya, who's a special rapporteur for Indigenous matters worldwide, said, look, the UN's trying to develop a model to partner with nations. It looks like you've already developed a model, and asked if we would take a trip outside of North America to see if our model would work in other places. We agreed. We traveled with members of Mr. Anaya's team and with the UN, and quickly asserted that, yes, we believe our model would work in any jurisdiction. Think about it, the same treaties that created Canada also created different venues in regards to Indigenous, whether it be Australia, whether it be New Zealand. It was the same king, it was the same treaties, and there's just only minor differences throughout the world. And so in 2016, we took our own wealth and decided that we should become a sector agnostic fund. And while we'll focus on North America to begin with, that we'll move outside of North America and throughout the world. Part of the premise, and even today, I find it really strange. It's the 21st century. As I said earlier, 55 million acres of reservation lands in the US, 160 million acres of reserve lands in Canada, plus almost 2 billion in traditional territory. Worldwide, billions in land and other indigenous rights, but yet there's not one capital provider that serves that space day over day. You can't even name another sector where you could produce the same analog. So in 2016, we started on a journey which was to become a capital provider for this space. And you'll hear me use the term pure play, meaning we don't do anything else. So you won't find us partnering with industry. You won't find us partnering in other ways. We only partner with Indigenous communities, and in a few cases with members of an Indigenous community. But otherwise, under our own mandate and our bylaws, we can't partner. So we could see a great transaction, but unless there's an Indigenous community involved. So we're pure play to this space. I want to back up now, having given you that entry, and we'll just advance a few slides. And so as you look at the, get my screen correct here, sorry. Thank you. As you look at this slide, basically, if you take a look at the Southern Utes, starting with their leadership, they focused on going from passive to active with their nation. Their goal, as they asked me to write them, was to be able to provide for the socio-economic well-being of their people in perpetuity. At the same time, they wanted to even excel past that so they could offer greater opportunity and prosperity to their members. And so these are a few excerpts from, I think maybe one was the New York, the Wall Street. There in the middle, you would see that the AAA rating we received in 2001. And basically, we refer to this as nation building. We believe that nations have both tangible and intangible rights that, empowered with capital, provide a great venue for investing, offering our investors returns while building or augmenting a commercial economy of tribes. And so if you looked into our history, you would see that we've left a wake of success. And in a few fortunate cases, we've been able to be part of building that ultimate, what we refer to as financial sovereignty. You know, most nations, especially in the U.S., where they're considered a dependent sovereign, would say they're sovereign. And our position is as long as you're dependent on anybody, you're not necessarily sovereign, because they have the ability to influence. So you should want to produce your own economic sovereignty. Next slide, please. We'll just jump through these. These were early 90s. Today, you look at the same picture with that nation. It's hard to tell from these pictures, but what's not demonstrated is they have a whole commercial complex. They have investments from Asia to Europe. They've built out their new campus, benefiting all members, housing programs. In fact, that AAA rating enabled them to anchor and assist and develop, along with the county in the Four Corners area of the states, one of the largest medical facilities in that area. So clearly the Southern Utes, let's call it approximately 1,400 people today, are a very affluent nation, not driven by casino, but driven by commerce associated with their rights, both on and off their reservation. And you can look at the impact that it's had to that nation by the numbers. And so we just wanted to provide a little background. Let's advance past this for just a second. Our model is straightforward. We partner with nations. In many cases, they've identified opportunity. We're not a fee-based organization. We only make money by investing. So we'll help a nation assess their opportunities. We'll create the proper structures along with them to enable us to place capital. We provide both the seed capital and in many cases the long-term capital to take a project, if you will, from farm to table. And then of course, we're ultimately going to exit. Depending on exactly what the investment is, the nation might want to exit as well. For instance, certainly some of our nations that were developed their resources, that's pretty risky. Once we had success, they would monetize. You wouldn't have to look far to see that we founded along with a nation and exited one of the largest energy companies, and certainly the largest tribally founded and monetized transaction in the U.S. And currently we focus on real estate, infrastructure, renewable power, and carbon offset agriculture. We're sector agnostic, so we'll look at all sectors, but these have a primary focus point for us. Next, please. It's just a little bit more about our model, really same information, but just a different lead into how we focus on partnering with nations. We would tell you we partner before we invest. And that's very important because all capital is fungible. Partners are not. And what's different about Indigena is when we partner, we help from the standpoint not only sourcing the capital, but also building the business models, providing back office to that, helping with all aspects of that particular business. We'll see one of those in a moment as we go forward. Next, please. This was just, once again, the AAA and where the UN has recognized our model. Next, please. This is a current project It's in Canada, southern Alberta. I think most of you would know the Blood Tribe of southern Alberta. I think maybe they're the largest land-based nation in Canada. And we have partnered with them on several fronts. This happened to be a project where they had, as they have a reserve of 300,000+ acres. Within that, they certainly have a large water allocation. Most of the land is purposed for ag. They had what I would refer to as a cottage industry, where they had a small Timothy hay opportunity there. We would say it was a world-class opportunity that needed to be converted into a world-class business. And we'll come back to this, but basically, we partnered that with the nation, and we ultimately will infuse about 50 million Canadian into this investment. But I think we have a little video that'll be fun for you to see about what this opportunity is. And we'll come back to the slide and it'll make a little more.
The Cando Blood Tribe have always existed on our lands. We were successful agriculturalists even after the buffalo was nearly exterminated, and until the imposition of outside barriers. Since the construction of the St. Mary's Dam in the 50s and the BTAB developments, the tribe has been actively working to restore its rightful place in the agricultural value chain. Ghana has developed an enviable irrigation project with the infrastructure to support 25,000 acres and beyond.
Over 20 years ago, we built a forage plant and have been growing and exporting forage from our lands to overseas markets, growing the business to almost 20,000 metric tons per year. Kainai Forage is a partnership with Indigena Capital, which will see investment of $45 million in growth capital to become North America's largest producer and exporter of premium forage product. The investment will grow our capacity from 20,000 tons per year to over 100,000 tons per year within the next 4 years. Kainai Forage has already grown to over 50,000 tons with the addition of 3 new storage sheds. Kainai Forage works in partnership with area farmers chosen for their ability to expand in conjunction with our operations and with the requirements that our farmers be best in class. Every bale on our project is inventoried and quality checked at harvest. It is then stored in our state-of-the-art sheds and graded for our overseas export customers. We store the hay on site so that it can be delivered overseas all year. They rely on us to deliver it on time year-round. We compete with other parts of the world for each of our customers, making efficiency critical to our success. Our expansion creates not just jobs, but career opportunities for our people. Kainai Forage has doubled its staff in the first 18 months of our expansion. The positions we are creating are not just on the production floor, but in the logistics, quality control, accounting, and inventory management, all key to our success.
Our customers range from dairies in Japan to racehorses in the Middle East, shipping to Asia, Europe, the Middle East, and North America. We are poised to become Canada's and North America's largest exporter of Timothy hay.
Thank you.
Justin,
Justin, if we'll and this just represents one of those investments where we came in, we inserted capital into the project, a certain business model. We provided support for back office and international logistics, and the Blood Tribe's vision is taking this from what I'd refer to as a cottage industry to they're already the largest producer now of Timothy hay in North America, probably the largest aggregator of Timothy in the next 24 months in the world. They'll enter the pet food industry and the equine industry. They'll build facilities, I'm sure, down in Florida. to expand this. So if you looked under our hood, regardless of the sector, whether it be real estate, infrastructure, agriculture, energy, renewable, we look for the opportunity to enhance the vision and goal and provide the needed equity. As we advance in this, and of course, they've seen employees, grow from a handful of employees to 50, and by the time it's built out, this says 70, but when you consider downstream opportunities, that will be well over 100, and those are substantial paying jobs with that entity. So this would be a similar case study to many of those that we would have in our past. In our past, we've done well over 70 transactions and probably deployed somewhere or sourced $2.5 to $3 billion in capital. Relatively new to Canada. First introduced to Canada in 2019. Next, please. I'm going to go down and show one slide from the appendix, if you have it, Justin, about when we look at Canada and the need to provide equity there. If you don't have that slide, I'll just talk about it. But similar to in Alberta, you have AIOC, which is Alberta's Indigenous Opportunities Company. You have CIB that has an Indigenous mandate. You have numerous programs across Canada, but they're all debt-based. You can't get to your debt-based programs without equity. And so even though there's almost $1 trillion under management through venture capital and private equity in Canada alone, less than 0.1% is allocated to the Indigenous space. And so Indigena is designed to solve that problem by building a permanent bridge of being able to provide capital to nations, not only in Canada and the US, but ultimately throughout the world. So love to have the team field some questions if there are any, and expand on any issues you'd like us to. So again, we'll take down this presentation and look forward to your questions. So thank you, Elizabeth and Michelle.
Thank you, John. I really, really appreciated the background story that led up to this organization. So thank you for sharing that. We're a people of story, so that really meant a lot. So does anyone have any questions, comments about the presentation that you just heard? The floor is open. The floor is yours. You can unmute yourself. You can use that chat box, whatever's most comfortable for you.
Can I ask a question, please?
Go for it, Vince.
So I came in a little bit late, John. My name is Vince Robinson. I work in Bella Coola. We are in a non-integrated area of Canada. And so we have a little diesel station that operates our electricity service providers, companies, services. And I guess we have, my question is what would be a small project that you guys would consider working in, and maybe a short example of a big project? I think we have some big asks, and I don't know if they're even relevant here or not, but that's kind of why I'm asking that.
Sure. Great question. Usually something very small for us would be, let's call it a $5 million equity spot. I would tell you that our average is 15 to 50 in regards to equity. Now remember, with equity, then there's debt. So if equity is representing half to 30% of an investment, the rest is debt. So that $50 million investment will take you up to a $150 million transaction, let's call it, depending on the cash flow profile. Certainly, we're not limited. So we're currently being asked to look at a $20 billion infrastructure project, which we are. The way we would handle that is we have our pools of capital, but then the partners that provide their capital to us, we can also go back to them on what we refer to as co-investment. And so if we have an awful large project, now let's call it up to 200 or 300 million, we would do that internal. Something greater than that, we're going to align some of our partners. So we would still represent them. We would still be the primary investor, but we would align those larger balance sheets to come in and partner along beside us.
Okay. Yeah, I think we might have, man, we're a small community, you guys, compared to probably the big things you guys are looking at, John.
Well, we, you know, I guess it's all relative. We are, while we're focused on building a permanent bridge into this community to access capital, success breeds success. And so we look at success, for instance, we'll invest in pillars like that ag project you saw on the hay. But we've also started an ag co-op because we want to scale from nation to nation, whether it's organics, whether it's hay, whether it's seed. Because think about it, every nation has land. They usually have a water allocation. In the States, they'd be first in priority water. And they have soil in every grow environment in the world. So why aren't indigenous communities solving food security? They should own that space. They just need capital. The other side of success is you might offer to us an opportunity to come into a new region. And that's a different part of success where we want our capital to be able to touch other communities. So you want to work with, there's certainly those communities that, while only a few are in metropolitan areas, the others are spread out provincially. If you're talking about the territories, well, we've certainly been up to look at projects, but we very much want to place some investments. We also look for the opportunity, like if it's, to build out a grid, a power grid.
Yes.
Right. So you want to then, to do that one off is hard, but if you can do it for 20 different communities, then you can make that work. And so, but, as I, always explain to my children when they said something like cost $100, I say it all starts with $1. And so, to ease into that market, we're always looking for good partners that give us exposure. And so I wouldn't be concerned. So feel free to reach out to us to talk about those kind of transactions. And the other thing that we do, because remember, we're not a fee-based entity. So we're going to look at an opportunity. We're not going to waste your time if we don't think we can do it. Even if we think we can do it, then we're going to model it and we're going to analyze it. And at no cost to you, now you're getting a model and you're getting our analysis. Then let's say we decide it's not suited for us. Because we live in the financial world, we actually might know a lot of partners that would do that transaction. And so, again, we partner with nations. And so our goal, usually when we take a look at something, is if it doesn't fit us, how can we make the nation, how can we help them to achieve their goals? So, we'll source an opportunity to another party if we have to, if it doesn't quite fit. Or quite honestly, if we think a partner is better than us, will provide you more value back to partnering, we're going to try to bring that better partner. Maybe our capital is too expensive for your venture. Now, the one thing that maybe some parties don't like is the first thing we look for is it investable. Can you place capital and expect a return while also meeting a need of the nation or allowing them to lever into that economics? Because we don't want to have a venture where you're not making money as well, right? If it was just to produce jobs for you, while that's accretive, our goal is to make sure that you're also partnering in the financial currents of that transaction as well. So you would call us an impact investor. So while our money is very focused on sector returns, we're also very focused on the impact that we're going to have towards any community's goals and vision. And so that's one of our internal mandates, is we're trying to bring about two benefits. One is a return. The other is augmenting or starting the underpinning of a new economy for the nations we partner with. So we really focus on partnering. But appreciate those questions very much.
Thanks so much, John, for your comments. Success breeds success. I love that. That speaks to me. Thank you. In the chat box, we had, I think it was Tara. So there's lots of opportunities with BC Hydro for us smaller communities. I don't know if you wanted to share a little bit more, expand a little bit more on that comment, Tara.
Yeah, so such as Vince, I'm in a pretty small remote area as well on Haida Gwaii. We have the added umbrella of our nation's governance model with economics, but we also have our community model of business on reserve. So BC Hydro has an Indigenous procurement office that reaches out to communities with bid opportunities. And ours is looking at having space for fuel supply firstly. We're also reaching out to the fuel services company that operates in our town to partner. So that's kind of how we're starting with the joint ventures. So it is really tricky. However, if leadership feels that clean energy is the direction they want to take, but not having like set targets or capital to achieve those right away. So it's almost like a pinball effect. So for us, it's right now, like the biggest opportunity seems to be the BC Hydro contract, which is going to get us some revenue coming in, but then it requires land. So that interconnection with the land and economic development is something that I was tasked to try and find harmony with, but it actually caused us to enter a land use plan journey. So we'll be doing land use planning for 3 years. So we're hoping to, in our land use planning, identify economic opportunities such as the BC Hydro contract. Like what happens if, because we're kind of in a catch-22 on reserve with companies not being able to finance either. So it's a really risky thing to do, investing on reserve properties. So I guess, how would that be addressed in this? Because if is it Indigena Capital that takes the risk, and then how does that work?
Sure. Well, almost in all of our models, one way or the other, the nations end up being a majority partner. Almost in every model, even where we provide all the capital. Because the way we look at things is that, and that might go through what we call a waterfall to get there, but in regards to structure. But ultimately, as we look regarding sustainability, the more that you're involved, the more that you have ownership. Obviously, incentives drive everybody's behavior, right? If we're aligned, everybody usually pulls the same way. In regards to BC Hydro, certainly we know them well. We would sit down with you to better understand your opportunity. We would model it from every angle and determine how we could deploy capital into that model. And that produces a co-partnering model, which says, okay, if we did this, this is how we would share that model and that return. Certainly, we're well aware of equity is the risk capital, but there's still debt. And quite honestly, we recently went through a venture where it took us 500 days to get a bank to do business on reserve, where off reserve, it would have taken less than 30. And it has more to do with the Indian Act and just banks not having the intestinal fortitude to help nations achieve their ultimate economic standing. That will change. It was the same way in the US when we started. But we come in and we help with that because they look at our balance sheet and we're able to do a few things to maybe entice them to do that. But the very first thing we would do is want to come, we'd want to meet, we'd want to understand about your nation, we'd want to understand about your members, your leadership, any bylaws that you have. Ms. Hammer, who's on the phone, does that work for us. And understand your goals and aspirations. And then something we're very good is helping you identify the entire value chain that's associated. So I remember the second nation I worked with in the States, they have something called TERA, which is just tribal preference on their land for all jobs, tribal employment preferences. And they assigned that to me as an outside investment advisor. And 2 years later, they came to me and said, John, we don't think that you're advancing that program. And I said, well, I don't believe in it. And they gasped a little bit and said, what? You don't believe in that preference? I said, no, because we're asking other people for jobs. Why don't we just own the businesses? Therefore, we own the jobs associated with them. And because when I look around at jobs, it's usually tribal members having the lower level jobs versus the senior level. And if we own the businesses, we can make sure that's not the case. So we focus a lot, even on procurement. What businesses can we build together? And then that provides a greater value chain, both economically and through this socio-economic chain. But again, it's something that we're used to is operating in a space where others usually find their own barrier not to provide capital or debt, as the case may be. And we find that Indigenous communities make tremendous partners. And I would tell you that we've outperformed any sector that we invested in over this 37 years now. And that is a result of great opportunities that nations control. As we all know, your rights and resources get eroded when you don't have the capital to bring those to market, to protect them and create value with them. We think that's a great arena for us to invest in. So thank you for your question, and we look forward to talking to you further at the right time.
Great. Okay, we have some more questions.
Okay.
Do you see a role for government programs in this space? And if so, have you noticed areas where these programs consistently fall short? And that's a question from Michael.
It's a great. So I'm gonna pick on Alberta, and I hate to because Alberta has fought enough issues, but the current premier there did a great thing by acknowledging that there needed to be a way to provide loan guarantee, and so they created Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corp or company, which enables nations to go. Where they fall short is, while that's a great program, it's meant to give guarantees on debt. We can't even talk about securing debt until you have equity. So it's all about the definition of capital stack. So any business that you start, just like buying a house in Canada, I think you're required to put 20-30% down to buy a house. Well, when you start a business, you're going to put 20 or 30% at a minimum equity capital. Then the business can go secure debt. So you have all these governmental programs. However, what you don't have are sufficient equity providers that allow you to use those programs. And that's what we really target. So whether you're looking at AIOC, CIB, I can name, there's various programs in each province. Without an equity partner, unless you have equity, and many times the Indigenous communities, First Nation, Inuit or Métis or tribal nations that have capital, they have to be stingy with that capital because the first priority of that capital is to provide for the well-being and social programs for its membership. It's not to take risk in investment. And so that's why we design our capital such that we'll take on that obligation with you and provide that capital and then partner that all the way through. So there's certainly many other programs. For instance, I don't participate right or left as far as political parties, but you can't have economics reconciliation. It's easy to acknowledge, but it's hard to really commit to overcome. And so as I look at Canada, and it pushes new economies into the forefront, nations are still left to go advocate that they participate in those new economies. So for instance, let's talk about renewable energy. So if you're going to do a wind project or a solar project, one of the primary motivations for a company to invest is the fact that if they build a $300 million wind farm, they get to write that entire expense off over a 2.5, 3-year period. So they're incentivized, and they can use that to offset taxes, so they can use money they were otherwise going to pay the government. But if you don't pay taxes, then you actually can't even be competitive in that program. And so I could go on for days about programs in US, Canada, or other places where the government, well, I think their intent is truly to produce economic participation and bring about reconciliation by bringing or giving all nations the opportunity to produce a developed nation status. However, the programs, it's always an afterthought on how the nations fit into the programs versus corporate Canada or corporate America. And so I would tell you that a lot more attention needs to be played if the intent is to foster development with tribal nations. Well, you could simply pass a bill about how lending banking institutions are going to it'll be mandated they provide a certain percentage of their debt book on reserve. Well, that would drive economic opportunity for nations. So I think just like the US, Canada and other places, while there's well-intentioned, most of the people writing the solutions aren't well enough versed in the true economic realities and business that takes place, and the hurdles that are placed in front of Indigenous communities. If they understood those, they would build better answers and better policy to tear those down to solve the problem. And in 37 years, and again, I didn't know, you can't solve a problem until you know, I have a lot of nations say we don't have the capacity, and I go, well, hold that thought. You have great capacity, but everybody's got to have experience to build their capacity. So what you might not have is the experience to build the capacity. What I'd tell you about most politicians, they have no experience in this space, none. So they can't provide the right solutions.
Very interesting. I feel like that could be a topic on its own. We still have some more questions here.
Great.
Trista, our good friend Trista from Saskatoon, she says, you mentioned an egg co-op. So I'm going to assume that's agricultural co-op. Is this
Yes.
an open membership for all nations?
It is. It absolutely is. Because again, just the simple, it's a great question. We try to do investments that once we build a capacity or a skill, we can scale from nation to nation. So think about it. Food security is one of the biggest issues in the world. Well, who has land and water in every jurisdiction in the world? So that means every grow environment. Let me give you an example. So you might not know this, some of you might. The average organic farm in Canada is 600 acres. Now, let me tell you the problem that produces. So we have double-digit demand for organics in North America and Europe, year over year. So you remember 10 years ago, your grocery store, there's a little section that said organic. Today, it's everywhere, right? But yet, less than 1% of our conventional farmland is converting to organic, because farmers would have to take it out of production for 3 years for it to become organic, which means landowners would give up rents as well. Well, now let's just go down to many nations I can name in Saskatchewan or name in Alberta or BC. They have fallow acreage that's never been farmed with water allocation. So if your General Mills or Costco or Walmart trying to put 500,000 metric tons of organic wheat flour in a flour mill, do you realize you have to deal with 10,000 farmers? It's crazy logistics. Well, with the right tribal co-op, you're going to deal with 3 or 4 nations at best to fill the bill. Logistically, you've saved them so much money. It's a huge opportunity. Therefore, they can pay you more, and it's a better venture. So we look for these niches within this space where nations have an advantage. And I would tell you that most Indigenous communities have tremendous advantages. Sometimes it's strength in numbers, like a co-op. Sometimes it's at a nation level. And that's really, we've become experts at partnering with nations. And of course, over time, we've learned that, our understanding has been gained. Just as when I came to Canada, I thought reserves were smaller than the US, which is true, except in the US, they don't have traditional territory. And when you look at the traditional territory, that's almost all like Canada. So in essence, Canada, there's not any sector of business that takes place across Canada that doesn't intersect with an Indigenous right. Well, to enable nations to participate in those rights, there needs to be a pool of capital. So great question. We would love, we actually know your nation and would love to visit with you about those opportunities.
Great. Okay, so we have like 2 minutes left. I want to get to Sarah's question, which is, do you have resources on how you structured and established those government funding relationships with nations to surpass Indian Act/laws?
Yeah, well, we don't provide funding for programs. We provide funding for projects. And we certainly, just like for instance, in the US, if you're doing ag, you can do, and I might get this wrong, we have others that would be experts within the company, but if we were doing ag, I could do a designation vote on that land, or I could just get I think it's like a 58 permit ag that the Indigenous Services is able to offer, the Indigenous minister is able to offer in that situation. So we in some cases, we're just willing to take the risk. If we see the right partner, sometimes we'll look at a transaction and say, look, we're comfortable with the risk we're taking. We think we have a great partner, a great opportunity. Let's proceed. And the fact that the government doesn't think it's a perfected right, as we're all making money, we usually laugh about that because we've assisted the nation, we've enabled the project. Sometimes maybe we need a full designation, referendum vote. Sometimes we're able to go to INAC, if you will, and work under a different authority.
Thank you. I'm wondering, Tara had mentioned in the comments, if somebody from your team could maybe post a link about the agriculture co-op.
Sure. Justin, probably the easiest place for them to get information on us is our own website. They can go to Kind of Forage. Would that be correct, Justin?
Yes, certainly if you come through indigenacapital.com, which I will post in the comments here, you can certainly get a hold of us. And as well, Kind of Forage is the first project in the agricultural co-op. So certainly information along there as well. We'll share Susan's contact information with Elizabeth and Michelle. So if you want to contact Susan directly, certainly contact Elizabeth and Michelle for that.
Yeah, I would just say in closing, Michelle, I've been a bad CEO because quite honestly, I have Justin and Susan on board, and the first thing you realize is I'm a generalist and they're the real experts, and we have a lot of staff that you can engage with. The most valuable resource of our company is we have great people, and they're all advocates for the space and experts within their field. And so just reach out to Justin or Susan. They'll put you in contact with the right people, and we would look forward to getting to hear what each community has in their future and what the opportunities are, and we like meeting people. That's what our brand is all about, is partnering. So again, want to thank Cando for the opportunity here today.
Well, thank you. We feel so honored that you have joined us. So thank you, John, Susan, Justin. I checked out your website earlier today. There's lots of good information. Like, if this is very intriguing to you, let this dialogue not stop. Ask those questions, make those connecting points. That's what it's all about. Connecting, partnering, asking those questions, and looking for that opportunity. And thank you. I'm blown away by what you folks are doing. Thank you so much for the knowledge that you have brought this afternoon. I feel very inspired, very encouraged, very hopeful, and I hope you all are as well. So thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. You can see this on the Cando website. I believe if you go under the links to learning, there will be the videos there for you, or some link to get you to the videos. So we are honored. Thank you so much. Be well as we go along our day. That may you take a moment and breathe in that good fall fresh air. Be thankful for the land in which you stand on and live on. So thank you, everybody. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.